Sorry. When the Most High apportioned the nations, when he divided humankind, he fixed the boundaries of the people according to the number of the gods. The Lord's own portion was his people, Jacob his allotted share. And then he goes through and he talks about how Jacob ate his fill, and Jerusalem, who that word is almost never used in the Old Testament. It's only in a couple of places, but we think it's probably a word for his brother Esau. And Esau grew fat and kicked. You grew fat, bloated, and gorged. He abandoned God who made him and scoffed at the rock of his salvation. They made him jealous with strange God, with abhorrent things that provoked him. You were unmindful of the rock that bore you. You forgot the God who gave you birth. The Lord saw it and was jealous. He spurned his sons and daughters. The question here is, are we faithful to what it is that we're supposed to be faithful to? Right? Do we follow and believe in? So one of the things about Jacob and Esau, who, if you know me, you know that I like Esau better than Jacob. I think Jacob was kind of a scum, but he did marry the right person. He married somebody within the promise, where Esau moved outside of the promise. And when you talk about things like the whore, you know what that's usually talking about? We think it's sexuality. It's really about faithfulness. It's about idolatry. Are you holding on to that which you have been taught to hold on to? Are you keeping what's most important most important? Are you remembering that the Lord is your king? Or is something else taking you away? Thus, the whore of Babylon, which takes you away from your wife and into a bed that's not yours, and carrying you away into the wrong space. Are you climatizing yourself to Babylon? Or are you remembering in that space of captivity that you are an Israelite? And who is your God? Not all those gods of Babylon, but the right God. Okay? The tough part about that is all of us mess up on that. And we especially mess up when all those curses come upon us. When hell starts falling, when the rivers are turned into wormwood, as it says, and they become bitter, when darkness is there and locusts come up and plagues come down from heaven, all of that makes it so that we forget. And we trust in other things. What is it that government sometimes does for us that's good about government? What's government for?
In the ideal, it is what we come together to work together towards, and that's Locke's version.
That's
that
right.
We gave up part of that total freedom.
That's right.
To live in community.
That's right. It's us giving permission to us to make laws, to help us out, to pave roads for us, right? Because I alone might be able to pave a bit of road, but not as well as what we can together.
Right.
Right? So government is not necessarily bad, but let's go the other direction. Who knows that sometimes government is?
Bad? Yeah.
Yeah. What's at least one way that today you see government not being the image of God on earth?
Children in cages in detention
That's
camps
exactly right.
on the border.
That has nothing to do, in my mind, about how government should work.
Right.
Right? We should not. I can't think of a way that kids in cages is fulfilling anything to do with my image of what government should be.
Right.
There's no excuse for that. What else?
Oh,
Hi, Earl. How are you? Sandy, good to see
Hi.
you. Now, I'm going to ask you two questions. One of them is going to be good. Have you seen how, in the midst of everything, we are trying to restore some of the image of? Have you seen some of the ways that we're trying to say, let's close those camps that are housing kids. Let's hold ourselves accountable. We've seen that, haven't we?
Mhm.
So that's our job, is to try to hold government to be what government should be. But how many have seen, this is the not so good question. How many have seen sometimes that what you think of as perpetuating God's movement in you, how many have seen that interpreted by someone else as the opposite of the, so to speak, the perpetuation of the beast? Make sense? Because you can see the beast in how they sometimes act, don't you? When they defend kids in cages,
Yeah.
you see the beast coming out of their mouth. But where have you heard them essentially calling you the beast?
The late Evan Meekum did that to me.
Yeah. What did he
We were in a small dinner, and he was going on and on about how gays were going to, force everybody, and I countered that, and so that was, anyways.
Yeah. And I think that issue is a good issue to bring up. At least part of the reason why my mom struggles with my choice of being a pastor here at St. Francis is because, well, you're perpetuating a sin, an evil, very clearly delineated in Scripture. How can you do that? She understands why I do now. Doesn't quite agree with it, because that sense of this is a sin gets into her mind too deeply. It's too deeply entrenched. And so she sees me perpetuating what shouldn't be, and advocating for what perpetuated what shouldn't be perpetuated, and advocating for what shouldn't be advocated. And so it's hard for her not to see some of beast in that. Right? Now, some of that comes from good religious spaces. Others of it comes from political and or economic things. Those poor people, they're not working hard enough, so I can't honor them for what they're doing. Well, I don't know about you, but sometimes poor people, my experience is that they're the hardest workers I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Right. In
Yeah.
Yuma, we had beautiful, amazing fields of lettuce. For 6 months of the year, you eat Yuma lettuce. And they were being picked by people who were not getting paid the highest of wages. But
Right.
we, if we want to eat salads in America, we needed their work.
Yeah.
And most of those were foreign nationals, right? Coming across legally into Yuma because it was simple to come across every day. But in other places, for 6 months of the year, that same thing transfers up to Salinas, up in California. It's not as easy to come over every day and work in those fields.
Right.
So the percentage of illegals is there. It's higher there. And people say that's perpetuating evil. Well, maybe and maybe not. The hard part is it's always easy to see the evil in someone else, to call them the whore, right? Call them Babylon. But the reality is what we have to figure out is how to work in the midst of this moment where all those things are not as clearly delineated as what they are in Revelation. Because Revelation uses these things like dragon, beast, whore, very clearly to be able to say there's something that's against you.
Mhm.
How do you fight against that which is against you without turning them into non-followers of the divine? Because as soon as I do that, as soon as I look at Ron and say, you're against me on this issue, and I call you the beast, if I call you by those things, if I see you from that lens, I lose my faithfulness because I'm no longer seeing you as who you are. And they do that really easily. How many have essentially felt their words calling you that?
Oh, yeah.
Like I've Meekin talking to you, Ron.
Yeah.
So how do we not return that favor even when they're wrong? Because here's the thing about the whole LGBTQ issue in America. Why is it that we are struggling with this in America, and especially and specifically in American churches?
Mhm.
Why is that an issue in American churches today?
That's a good
Because 7 to 9 Bible verses outweigh the larger.
Yeah, that is true, but that's not why it's an issue today. Because those have always been there, and people
Part
have
of it has
always
been,
used that.
yeah,
Why
part of
is
it's been
Go ahead.
manufactured, I think, because when I was an evangelical, there was being gay was not nearly as bad because politically this was back in the early 70s.
Yeah.
And when it became an issue, I mean, same thing with abortion. Abortion was okay back then,
Yeah.
at least if you were not Catholic.
Sure.
So
But why specifically did homosexuality and, from my point of view, the hating of LGBTQ people become the standard for the evangelical church, or for church in general? Look at Methodism. Why did it happen? I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
It's because gay people stood up in the church and said, you, church, are valuable enough to me that I'm not going to go run away and leave church. I'm going to stay right here. And what are you going to do about it? It's because they chose to be faithful to who they were in the space that they were in. And they said, here I am. And I think God loves me in this space. And our response was, it was much easier when you just left. It was much easier when we didn't have to think about you. The reason you didn't have to think about it in the 70s is because gays left.
Yeah.
They said, church doesn't want me, I'm going.
Yeah.
And in the decades since then, I think our LGBT brothers and sisters were strong enough to be able to say, that's not the way it should be. I belong in church. I can be faithful in church. I'm not running away. And then ask us as the church, what are you going to do about it? And so the faithfulness thing was then in our court. And we decided to just call them the beast and throw them out. But a bunch of churches said, okay, I hear you. And we chose to become the faithful followers, not to that prophet, that second beast that says this is the truth, but to what the real truth is. But it's hard because everything about the issue in those decades, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, just assumed a certain voice.
Yeah.
And to take a different path took a lot of strength. And it's true about children in cages. Immigration, in the mid 1990s, we made essentially immigration a felony and criminalized it and said we can throw everybody in jail. And so it changed the dynamic towards that. Instead of seeing them as human beings, we saw them only as felons and people that were wrong, worthy of prison. We were no longer treating them from a human point of view, and definitely not from a Christian point of view, because we could just say they no longer matter. They have made their own bed. And we lost our, even if they were right about immigration hurts, they were wrong about how they treated immigrants. We were wrong.
Yes.
And we lost our faithfulness.
Yes.
And so we became essentially part of the followers of the beast, of the dragon, of the whore, rather than. So there's an important part of this section, and it comes in chapter 17. And the beginning of chapter 17 says, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great whore, written on her forehead, Babylon the Great, mother of horrors and of earth's abomination." Okay? Not a very good portrait of what they're saying there. Sorry, I'm missing the part that I want to do. Anyway, I have it here. I'll put it up here. "And the 10 horns of the beast that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast. They are united in yielding their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful." And that's not quite the passage I wanted, but I'll get to that. So this is what I want. "Alas, alas," it says in chapter 18. "Alas, alas, the great city of Babylon has fallen." And I want you to see what this is saying. It's not, it will fall, but it has fallen. Okay, here's what it says. "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. It has become a dwelling place of demons, a haunt for every foul spirit, a haunt for every foul bird, a haunt for every foul and hateful beast. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxury." This is part of the liturgical section, chapter 18 is. And so the first thing it's saying is that Babylon is already fallen. It's gone. But how are we still giving that Babylon power? Okay, so here's how it happened. The kings of the earth, the merchants of the earth, the shipmasters and the seafarers in this section all cry out, "Alas, the great city." And the kings say, "In 1 hour your judgment has come." The merchants say, "All this wealth that we had has been laid to rest." And the shipmasters go, "All who had ships grew rich by her wealth, and now it's gone." You see, what they're worshiping in that moment is that which benefits them, which helps their thing. But is it of God?
Yeah.
So in all our actions, what this is all saying is, what do we have to do so that we're in the space of truly hearing God's way, God's call, God's idea of how things should work, or are we perpetuating just what helps us? So let me do it this way, because we know how the Republicans do it wrong. So let me talk to some progressives and say, in a few months, when we unelect certain people, what kind of government are we going to set up? And can we be just as beastly, or do we, in the midst of this, set up something that is better? So one of the things that bugs me the most about our legislatures and our Congress and most of our process is that everyone votes one way and we force everyone else to believe, to follow whatever my majority says. If you win an election and you have one more vote than someone else, it doesn't mean that suddenly all your ways become perfectly right, because now you can get the votes to pass something. We have to figure out, one of the things that's most broken about our system right now is that when Democrats come in, they impose things on Republicans. When Republicans come in, they impose things on Democrats. Neither one of those is a good democracy.
No.
That's just tyranny by one side or the other.
Right.
And when we are just tyrants that way, what are we becoming?
The beast.
We're becoming the beast. Even if our ideas are right. How do we work to become something different? One of my great heroes, Ron, you may have known him, is when I came to Arizona in 1984, was this magnificent man who never, ever was in a position of majority in Arizona's legislature. And yet he was one of the most influential and most respected men in that legislature. He was a man named Art Hamilton. You remember him? Oh my!
No, I don't know, but yeah.
He was the longtime minority leader of the in the House, the Arizona House. Never ever was in the majority, right? But when things needed to be done, people would go to Art Hamilton and say, talk and share and be together. So he influenced power in a way that said that it was more, maybe I should say he influenced, he exercised influence in a way that said, let's talk, let's share, let's be together in this. Okay? How do we today get that same kind of conversation going, where the Evmekums come to the Art Hamiltons and talk to each other, even when they disagree?
One thing to do would be to look at ending gerrymandering. So instead of having Democrats do the same thing that Republicans did in 2010, is to look at building our democracy, including ending gerrymandering, taking money out of the process, so that we begin to have, one of the problems is that, and I say this as a former Republican, my party became that which it feared. It became the tyrants and the narrow ideological cult that it once feared.
Right. Yep.
And we can, we can do it too. So I think the first thing is to broaden up democracy and rebuild it, invest in infrastructure.
I agree. And there's a whole bunch of that stuff where we've been so busy fighting for my way that we forgot to build what is the greater way.
Or our way. Yeah.
What is our way? What benefits us, not just what benefits my party or my district or whatever it happens to be. If I'm fighting for narrow, then I'm probably following the beast. All of those people that I put up there, their problem was, the kings, the merchants, the shipmasters, they're all saying, look, this is what I'm losing.
Mm-hmm.
This is what, because this fell, this is how I'm hurt by it.
Mhm.
Not this is how I'm hurt. This is how we're struggling. So in the midst of this coronavirus, if I'm saying I've got to fight so that I can go and eat in a restaurant, then I'm looking for my way.
Mhm.
But if I'm saying when is the right time to be able to make it so people are safe to go back into a restaurant,
Right.
so that that industry has once again a strong place in Arizona society.
Mhm.
If I'm trying to figure out how to take care of the people who this has hurt the worst, because most of us are in a place of at least enough economic security that we'll get by on the other side okay, won't we?
Mhm.
But who won't survive this, or who won't survive it easily? And in the midst of all this, are we trying to work towards helping that side of our society be strengthened so that it survives?
Mhm.
So one thing to do is to look at politics and economics out of the zero-sum game, so that
Right.
if you win, then I lose. And
Yeah.
so if we open up to the difficulties that structural racism has caused in society, yet the fear is that if we give that away, then somehow I will be poor instead of having all of us be better off.
Yeah. But a lot of that comes down to recognizing that enough, the word enough,
Yeah.
is a good
Yes.
spiritual discipline,
Mhm.
right? That I don't have to have one more to be okay,
Yeah.
right? And that maybe my one more is better given to you than for me to have it. And how do I set up a society that allows all of us, you know, the whole concept behind a minimum wage, for example, was so that everyone had enough,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And people want to argue, but Jesus was very clear. Do you guys know the parable about the laborers in the vineyard?
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, this is a story about a guy who goes out and hires people, and he has more work, so he goes out and hires people two hours later, and then hires people 2 hours after that, and so people get hired every 2 hours throughout the day, and at the end of the day, he calls everybody back in and he pays everyone the same thing. Right? So the people who got hired the first hour, because the people who got hired on the 11th hour, they got paid the full day's wage. They're thinking they're going to get really good stuff. And what they get is, guess what?
Same.
The same thing. Why? Because first of all, that's what they agreed to. But second of all, because that's what they need. Right? And that person who got hired on the 11th hour, it wasn't because they were hired there because they weren't willing. It's because you didn't hire them. They got hired on the 11th hour, and they needed how much to be able to live in that day? The day's wages.
Yeah.
Right? And that goes against some of our, I should get paid more because I work harder, or I should get paid more because. The question really comes down to is, are people getting paid what it is that they need to be able to survive? And part of the stuff that's happening right now is the inequity of some people getting paid too much at the expense of other people that aren't getting paid enough.
Yeah.
Are we spending too much on military at the expense of diplomacy? Are we spending too much on this so that are our healthcare costs skyrocketing because some people are getting an undue profit without giving much to the system?
Mhm.
All of those kinds of questions are questions that will hurt some of the merchants and the shipmasters, but what will happen is that the kingdom of God will be built better. The different way of looking and helping and being in community with each other will be better, but it will hurt some people because they want one more. The hard part about all this is there's not a simple solution,
Yeah,
No.
for sure.
right?
Right.
But all of this is saying you've got to believe in something different than what is easiest for you to believe in. And part of that is the us against them mentality. Part of that is the I have to get my own mentality, the selfishness. Part of it is the who belongs and who doesn't, who should and who shouldn't. We have to start seeing each other from the larger perspective of the relationship between us and our dependence, our interdependence on each other.
There was something today, Jim, on NPR about a meeting in Geneva, and this consensus was that there has to be a vaccination or something to combat the virus that's shared by the whole world.
Yes,
If
yes.
it's not shared by the whole world, then they can never get this under control.
Right.
And this type of a virus reminds us of how it's not enough just to keep myself safe inside my enclave. That we have to do something larger than that. We have to take care of the poorest among us if we're going to take care of whoever I'm most concerned about. Right? It's an us thing that has to happen.
Yeah.
And I hope we go ahead.
But that's not the way our leaders, and I mean the world's leaders, are looking at the problem. Two of them in particular are looking at it as a competition.
Right. And see, we do that almost, especially in America, we have a really hard time not seeing us it from an us against them type of
Oh yeah, absolutely.
right? We've been raised so much on competition is just what it is. We've canonized the survival of the fittest type of thing.
Yeah.
But the reality is you know what really the species that survived weren't just because they were the strongest, because something like a Tyrannosaurus Rex is a pretty strong beast,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's usually because somehow they figured out how to care for each other and perpetuate the species, not just the individual. And how are we going to perpetuate that which we hold most dear?
It's moving beyond because we've had that dog eat dog as the total evolution, when really the symbiotic relationships in community have been as much part of evolution. There's 10 times more living organisms on my body that are not part of me that are helping all of us.
Yeah. We talk about in the Wild West out here, we talk about how it was the Colt 45, the gun that won the West. And that's just historically inaccurate, right? Those are good stories maybe for my competition-based mind, but you know what really won the West? Farmers, right? Cattlemen that came up and settled and planted and put together towns that changed where we're at. So we didn't have to shoot each other. So we didn't have to fight off the robbers, right? It was a whole different thing that tamed the West. But the other's a much more romantic story,
Yeah.
right? And so we keep telling that. And I think that's part of what's fueling the people that are stockpiling weapons today. Well, someday I'm going to have to fight the zombies.
Yeah. Or the government.
Or the government, right? That's right. And so we easily feed that back to each other, and that's typically not healthy for the larger picture. the larger picture is when we start looking at each other and saying, you know what? We need each other.
I think a good example of that, Jim, is Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Taiwan had the lowest number of deaths because everyone cooperated with the distancing and the masks and everything they were asked to do.
Yeah.
They were able to continue going to work and having sports and having everything. They didn't shut down anything, but they adhered to the things that they were asked to do to keep them safe. So the whole country came together.
Yeah. The problem is that to do that, I have to believe something that I don't want to believe in if I'm not careful. Can anything good come out of Taiwan? Can anything good come out of China, out of Russia? And it has, and I have to accept that there's a lot of good, even in the places where I might be opposed for whatever reason, right? Can anything good come out of the Trump administration?
We'll see.
My first reaction is to say no.
We'll see.
But can I find people within that are maybe not that? Can we begin re-looking at each other better than what we did? Because I believe, for me at least, that divine voice, where I don't think it is that which will save us no matter what, will miraculously come back. I do think it is that which calls us to our best self, and not just us, but our enemy as well. And that somehow we both hear that voice, and symbiotically we move towards that which is best. And it takes,
But to do that, we have to talk to each other.
we
and
do.
Not just listen, but understand at a
Yep.
gut level
Yep.
why
Yep.
they feel the way they do. And
Right.
right now, that's difficult to find somebody who'll even sit and talk to you about.
I know, and I think they feel the same thing about us. I
I do
don't think
too.
it's true in the same way that it feels like it's true the other direction. Okay, but we have to deal with the fact that they think it's true that way.
Yeah.
That I'm never going to listen to anything they say.
Yeah.
And that's hard because unless we talk to each other, I'm certain that our nation will fall just like Babylon, just like Rome.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I'm afraid we're looking at.
Yeah. And it may not be in our lifetime, but it's not. If you'd have told me 15 years ago we'd be in the place where it even seemed a possibility, I would have laughed at you.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem out of the realm of possibility today, does it?
That's-
But I'll use my life as an example, though. 45 years ago, to even be sitting here questioning, because you all are the voice of the devil trying to take my faith, my belief away from me and cast me into to use the revelation, into the lake of fire like everybody else.
Yeah.
And I think that's the real challenge and beyond that, I mean, I'll use my father as an example. When we went camping across Texas, he refused. Somebody was making comments about African Americans. He said, "I'm not going to camp here." He went on. But in his later years, Fox became his sole source of information. He began saying the very things, that Fox did, and he became something less than what he was. And I think that I don't know how to deal with that. To recognize what I did was just to recognize the fear. I mean, he was really fearful.
Yep. Part of the reason why I wanted to do this class is because we have to tell a different story out of books like this than what have been told.
Mhm.
Okay. So I hope I've helped you to see some of what has to see differently. And next week is crucial to that as well. Okay. Because the images that sometimes get used from next week are the ones where they interpret it a certain way, and it is not the way that it's supposed to be interpreted. Okay? And those are some of the passages like about heaven, but also about hell. And how both those are interpreted is not the way that John presents them. And we have to be bold in reinterpreting those scriptures for the world. Okay? One of the worst things that happened in my lifetime, I watched it happen, and we didn't stop it, is we allowed the moral majority to be the only voice of the religious community. And we, as another legitimate voice in that community, have got to be bolder in saying that does not speak our religious truth. Maybe it speaks a religious truth, but it is not the whole of religious truth. And we abdicated that in too real of a way. We allowed them to have all the voice. And our job, I think, has to be to rectify that. All right, so next week we'll deal with the last 3 chapters. And like I said, it goes all the way from heaven to hell. And we'll figure it all out. Let me tell you what the plan is for after that. I'm going to be teaching 2 classes on 2 different books, these 2 books. And I'd like for us during this hour to deal with this book. It's called The Book of Joy. It's a conversation between the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. And it's how do I, in the midst of all the stuff that I face, all the stuff that they faced, how did they find ways to be able to see the larger picture, the joyful picture, not just the persecution, the death, the rejection that was there. On Wednesday mornings, I'm going to be teaching this book, which is Fear. It's Thich Nhat Hanh's book. Also a man who had to face a lot of less than perfect life, and so has some really good insights about helping us deal with it. The good news is that it'll be Tuesday morning at 10, and if you can't come to that, all of these things are online. So
Yeah.
you can always do it that way. And we're saving all of these classes so that people can come back to them.
Great. That's great.
All right. So hopefully you can be at one or both of those classes.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate you guys.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
And hello
Thanks,
to
Jim.
everybody.
All right. Appreciate it.
Stay safe.
Yep. You too.
Yep.
Bye-bye now.